So you've got an OBD2 car and you've got that agonizing check engine light on and the code P0420. I have that code currently on both my EM1 Civic and on my 99 Integra GS. I don't want to replace the whole Cat and you probably don't either. So OBD2 cars will generally have two oxygen sensors. There'll be a primary O2 sensor and a secondary O2 sensor. Now the primary O2 sensor is going to be before the Cat. That's really the important one. That's the one that's going to affect your air fuel mixture. The secondary O2 sensor is generally going to be after the Cat or maybe in the Cat. And all this secondary O2 sensor does is basically measure the emissions that are leaving the Cat, and then it's going to determine if your car is meeting the emissions standard or not. And if it's not, then it's going to throw the P0420 code. Now the secondary O2 sensor actually has no bearing on how the car runs. Now I'm not saying you would ever want to delete this sensor, because if you have a code in the system either for the primary or secondary O2 sensor, like a faulty O2 sensor code, the PCM will actually then just run the car on a default air fuel mixture ratio, which may not be ideal. P0420 though, that won't affect how the car runs at all, and it's just flagging the car to fail emissions basically. To get that light to turn off without replacing the Cat, we're going to have to retain the secondary O2 sensor, but make the computer think that the car is running more fuel efficiently than it is. Well, the simplest way is going to be with one of these, and these are generally called O2 sensor spacers. You'll have your O2 sensor threaded into the spacer, and then the spacer threads into your Cat. And this pulls the sensor slightly out of the Cat, but the main thing is, if you look down there, you'll see that it's a very narrow opening, so it's restricting the amount of emissions that are making it to the actual O2 sensor, and that should trick the computer into thinking the Cat is running more efficiently. Now this is the most basic kind that you'll find. This is what I used in my Civic and it works great. Sometimes they don't come with copper washers, so you may want to get a copper washer. Make sure that you put some anti-seize on these threads. These won't come with any anti-seize on them like O2 sensors do. Now for some cars though, you can't use this. This worked great on my Civic, but on my Integra there's very little clearance between the top of the Cat and the bottom of the floor pan. You're going to find that the top of your O2 sensor is probably going to impact the bottom of the floor pan, and it'll likely eat away at your wires and then wreck your O2 sensor. There is this 90-degree style, but this actually won't work in Integras either because you can't tighten it. This will hit the flange of the exhaust pipe. And this is the one that I'm going to attempt to use on my Integra. It comes in two pieces. You'll be able to thread this first piece into the Cat, and I'll be able to tighten this without hitting the exhaust flange because it doesn't have a thing sticking out. And then once that's in there, you will connect this other piece up to it. This one I'll link in the description as well. You might want to pick up your own copper washers for it because this one definitely doesn't come with copper washers. And again, put some anti-seize on all those threads. I'll show you guys how I did this both on my EM1 Civic and on my Integra GS. In either case, the first step is to use a flathead screwdriver to pop this little boot out so you can pull the harness down and undo the connector. You should do this before you start loosening the O2 sensor so you don't twist up the wires. For actually loosening the O2 sensor, I normally like to use a full-size O2 sensor socket. Here's me using one on my Civic. Wow, that was a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. That worked well. But of course, in the Integra, it has to make everything more difficult, so it won't fit. You have to use a half-height O2 sensor socket. I'll link both down in the description. And then that socket, you can connect it to a 3/8 drive ratchet. And then I had to slide a pipe over the end of my ratchet here because I needed a little bit more leverage. Well, we got it at least. Usually every time I break it loose with this O2 sensor socket, this then gets stuck on the O2 sensor, and you can't thread the O2 sensor out with that on it because it'll hit this flange behind it. So you usually end up having to tap this with a hammer to get this socket off. So have one nearby. Give it a whack. There we go. And now we can pull this right out. There we go. I'm gonna go ahead and thread this back in now. Oh, I can't fit this socket over there now. As you can see, reinstallation with the straight O2 sensor spacer on the Civic is really easy. Just thread it back in, tighten it up, and reconnect the harness. Oh. All right, back up you go. The Integra, however, plays a little less nicely. When you just try to thread it in, it wants to orientate with the hole facing this way, which just won't work because of this flange. So I had to use a comical amount of washers there to get it to work. The way the threading works out just doesn't work out. There's lots and lots of threads still engaged into the Cat. The piece that goes into the Cat is really, really long. That's what we had to do. Now we'll go and thread the other piece in. So I got this attached into there now, and then O2 sensor going into there. I'm just gonna tighten it up. But I think this is just kind of what you have to do on an Integra with what's available out there. It's, this works really easy on most cars, and like I said on my Civic, but it's just a pain the way everything lines up on Integras. That's just the way it is. Make sure that this O2 sensor is in here tight. Can I fit my wrench on here even? Oh God. Oh yeah, I can. Actually, I should use my O2 sensor socket to tighten this. I wonder if I can actually fit my really nice one on here. Oh, nice, yeah, you can. With the full length O2 sensor socket on here, now I can fit my 1-inch on here. All right, should be nice and snug. You do want to make sure that the O2 sensor is always still going to be replaceable, but the O2 sensor itself is actually going to be easier to replace now because I can actually fit my good full-size O2 sensor socket over it, which remember, that wouldn't actually fit on there before with the way that the Integra is orientated, and I was having to use this one. And this should take care of P0420 on an Integra. A little bit of a pain on these cars, much easier on a Civic, but if you've got an Integra and you need to do this, even though it's not pretty, this should work just fine. And no one's really gonna see this anyways, unless you take it somewhere to get your oil changed. Then they're gonna be like, what the fuck?